The Alec Baldwin trial is now in process. Yep, the first day of real trial time has actually passed us by. And James and I, we're going to be talking about that and a whole lot more on this episode of Charlie Crimebuster. It's what some people are calling, yep, they're calling it the fastest minutes in podcasting.
The views and opinions expressed in this presentation are solely those of the individuals interviewed or participating and do not represent those of Charlie Crimebuster nor Peacemaker Network. All individuals described or mentioned in the presentation should be considered innocent until found guilty in a court of law. This presentation contains subject matter such as violence and graphic descriptions, which may not be suitable for all audiences. Listener and viewer discretion is advised.
Well, James, what a day this has been at the courthouse. What do you think?
Oh, wow. Well, what do you think about the trial so far?
Well, hey, a lot of it, but let's get a little housekeeping out of the way first and invite all of our people. If they have not subscribed yet, hit that subscribe button, become a part of the Charlie Crime family. Also, if you'd like to help us promote it by getting the word out to your friends, that would be great as well. We're excited that every single week we're getting new listeners and new people who join into the YouTube channel as well. Also, if you'd like to support the program, go to peacemakernetwork.com, and there you can become a badge, BADGE supporter. You not only help us with the program, but you also help the brave men and women who run toward danger instead of away from danger. And go to peacemakernetwork.com. By the way, James, we'll have a little link in our show notes that people can get to those links, correct?
That is correct. They'll be able to get to all of the links, both even the Twitter and the Facebook links as well.
All right. So, folks, make sure you pay attention to the show notes. All you got to do is click on those links and you can become a part of the family. So, James, the first day, wow, what a day it was, huh?
Right. Well, what do you think about the trial, and how long do you think it's going to last after what you've heard thus far?
Well, it started off today. Of course, yesterday they were able to get the jury together and started off today. They're telling us that they are expecting it to last 9 days. And I don't know, you really can't predict these things, but 9 days from now, perhaps this will go to the jury. And guess what? The last trial, the jury, after they had the case, they only deliberated for 2.5 hours before they came back with a verdict, James.
Right. I read that. Yeah.
Yep.
2.5 hours.
That's correct. Yep.
Now, are they going to be sequestered, by the way?
I don't know. I don't think so. The way they're talking to them, giving instructions. I heard this, make sure, when you don't go home and get on and Google Google this and all that sort of thing. I do not think they're being sequestered. Of course, they will be probably sequestered whenever they get into deliberations. Maybe then. I don't know for sure. Yeah.
Well, how does that work when somebody is a jury member and another family member turns on the TV or is watching TV or is, streaming some video or audio, and this individual happens to overhear it? Do they have to disclose that, or do they have to, ignore it, or what do they do?
Well, they're told, first of all, to not only ignore it, but not even listen to it. But if there is, like, say someone comes up to them on the street and they start wanting to talk to them about the trial, then they are to report this to the judge by the way of the bailiff, this sort of thing. So, hey, somebody came to me and attempted to talk. I did not talk to them. But the big thing is just ignore it. And I'm sure all these jurors have told the people. And by the way, there are 12 jurors now, 12 jurors, 4 alternates, and 11 women and 5 men. So it's, I don't know what that means. If there's more women on the jury than men. What do you think?
I don't know. Some women are sympathetic to the actor. It could be because Alec is quite a handsome man and also a very talented actor. So it's very possible that they could parlay into that, perhaps. I don't know.
I think that's the thing that's really interesting about this trial is that where we have most trials that we kind of look at the victim and we look at the defendant, this sort of thing. What is the difference whenever there is a well-known movie star? For instance, remember O.J. Simpson? Very
Right.
well known. He got off.
He did.
And even even recently with some of the trials of some of the top people, I can recall the celebrities seem to have a more sympathetic ear, I guess, from the jury than others. And I guess the question is, will Alec Baldwin get that same sympathy from the jurors that other movie stars have gotten? So going to be interesting to see. I think there's certainly an unknown there as to whether that's going to help him or hurt him. And the other side of that is some people could say, well, hey, he's a big celebrity. He thinks he's above the law. So they may do that. But of course, if they listen to the judge is very plain. Put all that aside and focus on the evidence. And by the way, there was one juror that I read about that did excuse himself, and he said he excused himself because he was already convinced that Baldwin was guilty. So that's certainly not the kind of guy that the defense would want on the jury, right?
Yeah.
And the question is, how will other people feel about it? And James, at the close of our podcast tonight, you're going to give us some statistics on how people, our fans, and those folks who are part of the Charlie Crime Train group actually believe this trial will actually end, right?
We had a fantastic response on our I guess you could say we call it a poll.
Right.
We just polled our audience on what they thought the verdict would be in the New Mexico court case involving Alec Baldwin and the Rust movie set. So, and that accidental shooting back in October of 2021. So, we'll be disclosing that information later in the show.
Yeah,
so stay tuned.
They got to stay tuned to get that, right?
That's right. That's right.
We'll kind of put that little teaser out there, right? Keep them on board. Although I don't think we have a hard time keeping our people on board. They're great. They're a great crime family.
Well, you were just talking about the jury, and the jury selection. Do you have like any additional comments that you want to point out about the jury that you might have heard of, other than that one juror that recused himself?
Well, I thought one of the things that was interesting, there were 7 jurors that in this pool of people that they were looking at, and out of these 70 people, there were only two people that said they had not heard about the case. So all these jurors had heard about the case. And of course, because you've heard about a case doesn't necessarily mean that you can't be fair about it. I thought it was interesting in the jury selection. Some of the questions they were asked about, how they feel about weapons. Several of those that were questioned actually owned weapons themselves. So I think that that's going to be a plus, and the fact that they're going to be a little more knowledgeable about weapons than other people.
Yep.
One lady said that she hated guns, and another guy said, that he believed that you should treat every gun as a loaded weapon. You should never point a weapon at anybody.
He was trained right.
Yeah, but then they came back and they said, but what if your instructor said something? Would you follow your instructor? And they said, well, yeah, I would follow my instructor. So, that brings back to what we're going to get into in a moment about the prosecution and the defense. But they do have a jury that's seated now. 12 jurors, 4 alternates, 5 men and 11 women, and they're listening anxiously as the trial got underway today.
So now that we're on to that topic, what details would be good to know that has happened outside the actual court proceedings that we will be following as well?
Well, we've been paying attention to some of the things that they've been arguing before they get to trial. One of the things I thought that was most interesting, that probably has more of an impact than any other, was the first trial. You had all kinds of indication that they were pointing out that Alec Baldwin was a producer, and because he was a producer, he had a responsibility to keep the set safe. And they were going about bringing the line to the jury and in the case that because he was a producer, he had a greater responsibility to make sure that it was safe. Well, believe it or not, the judge actually ruled that you cannot come and bring, he's not on trial for being a producer,
Right.
He's on trial for what happened at that moment. And so the judge has said, no, you can't bring this line that he is a producer, and because he's a producer, he's should be more responsible than any other actor out there. So I thought that was very interesting that the judge kicked that out, so that cannot be part of the argument.
Wow. But we also keep hearing things about law enforcement mistakes. What can you tell us about that?
Well, being a retired law enforcement officer myself, I always pay attention to that. But police are not perfect; they make mistakes like anybody else does.
Yeah.
But the thing that I think that was so incredible about this one was that, when they started the witnesses today, and one of the officers that arrived said that when he arrived there was about 200 people there. That's pretty overwhelming to come to a crime scene and find 200 people there. So, this obviously, this is not an average crime scene. You don't see a lot of crime scenes taking place on a movie set unless they are part of the movie and, part of the production. Right. And so here is a police department, law enforcement agency that's, it's not that large of an area. It's out in the rural area. And I believe that they found themselves very, very quickly into a really crazy, crazy crime scene. And there were some mistakes I thought that they made, but I think it was just because they were reacting the best they could at the time when they got there. First of all, it doesn't appear to be, like a murder trial of some sort, or a murder took place. It was actually introduced to the officers as an accidental shooting. Mm-hmm. And so when they came there, they probably did not at the very beginning treat it like a crime scene. And so there were times when the witnesses were not separated. They were talking among themselves. And one of the first things you always do on a crime scene as a police officer is you want to separate the witnesses. You don't want one witness to taint the recall and the revelation that witness is going to bring to be tainted by someone else. So they did not immediately separate the witnesses. Another mistake was that, this was a very hectic crime scene. There were people moving all around there. And until they got the tape up and said, hey, in fact, you heard in one of the videos today in the trial, you heard one of the officers yell, hey, this is a crime scene. We got to treat this like a crime scene. They put the tape up then. But before then, there was all kinds of people mingling about there. The silver or the gray cart that had all of the weapons and the ammo, was people were handling that. One person had actually taken some stuff and thrown it away. So there was a lot. I think that this crime scene was tainted. Now, whether that will impact the trial that much, I'm not real sure, because, it wasn't the idea of, we don't know who did this. We know who fired the weapon, so there's not that, who someone else did it type of thing. But to me, I think that they just appeared to be a little overwhelmed. And of course, I think a mistake was that they actually, in doing those tests, and I think this was the FBI, in doing these tests, they actually end up destroying that trigger. Mm-hmm. Now, they said that, they said, hey, that really doesn't matter. We know that this was a perfectly, functioning weapon, but even though they tried to, give it a good twist to make it sound, sound like it wasn't as negligent, I think it was a mistake. I think they could have gotten the same results without destroying that trigger. And I think that that's going to come back to haunt them in this trial.
You think it was the trigger or the hammer?
Well, the hammer, when they actually, took a large hammer and hit it, and they destroyed part of the gun. And so as a result of this, the prosecution's coming back and say, well, they made all kinds of mistakes. We can't look at that weapon like we looked at it before, as far as that goes, So yeah, there were some mistakes made, no doubt about it. But let me tell you another mistake. I think Baldwin made a real mistake himself in the very beginning of this, because he was talking so freely. There's something that attorneys always tell you when the police come around. You know what they always tell you to do if it's your attorney?
Yeah, Miranda.
Yeah, they say be quiet.
Be quiet. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, don't talk.
Yep.
And so
you have the right to remain silent.
That's right. And I was so amazed as a police officer I knew that people had this right, and I would oftentimes give somebody the Miranda rights, and it just blew me away at how people would just push that aside and talk.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
and in talking, they would incriminate themselves.
Mm-hmm.
Well, James Baldwin, I think one of the things that really brought this back to prosecution, because at first they had dropped the charges, was the fact that Baldwin said, "I did not pull the trigger." And I think if he had not said that, because then what did the case do? The case moved around to try to prove that he was wrong, that he did pull the trigger. And so that's what really opened up this whole case. Think about if he had not said anything, would we even be looking at this trial today? I'm not sure that we would.
Do you think it was possible that he may have just pulled back the hammer
Well,
of the gun and it slipped? And
I think we're going to see, that this is going to be argued in court. But I guess the thing that I pointed out, that it could have been a non-issue,
yeah,
if he had not said that, and then they come back and say, well, there's no way that weapon can fire unless you pull the trigger. So suddenly the attention went not to whether this was an accidental shooting, an accidental discharge, or it went from that to did he or did he not pull the trigger.
Mm-hmm.
And that's that's going to be a part of the case. So if he had just been quiet, maybe we would not be here. Who knows?
Wow. All sounds crazy. Speaking of crazy, do you have a crazy crook story for us this week?
Oh man, do I have a crazy crook story? Yeah, I pretty well could determine that this was a crazy crook story because of all the places that it happened. It happened in our nation's capital, Washington, D.C. So you can't tell me there are not a lot of crazy people around Washington, D.C., right? We all think that they're all crazy.
We all know
that. Yeah. But there are crazy crooks up there, not only crazy senators and crazy politicians and crazy lobbyists.
Yeah.
There's actually crazy crooks. And this guy is a guy by the name of Kentrell Flowers, Flowers. And at 1:15 a.m., Mr. Flowers decided that he was going to carjack a car and a person. And so he approaches this car where a guy is sitting in it, and he pointed a handgun at a man sitting in his car outside of a group of condos. And he attempted to carjack him. There was just one problem, James. There was something that this crazy crook did not know. The guy in the car was a United States Marshal that was working on a protective detail for some of the Supreme Court judges who lived there.
Oh, wow.
And so I would say, James, if you're going to carjack a car, probably ought not do it with a U.S. Marshal sitting in the seat.
Right.
So, the Marshal, he drew his service weapon, fired several shots at the suspect. And then there was a second Marshal in another car who also fired several shots at him. And they did strike him. But fortunately, even though he was hit by gunfire, he was taken to the hospital. He was treated for non-life-threatening injuries. And good. So he survived it. But now, he's facing charges of armed carjacking, carrying a pistol without a license, possession of a large capacity ammo feeding device. So the moral of the story is, you crazy crooks out there, if you're going to carjack a car, and I hope you don't, you shouldn't, it's bad. But if you do, you probably ought not to pick a United States Marshal to try to carjack, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So that indeed is Charlie Crimebuster's crazy crook of the week.
Wow. I mean, he obviously didn't do his homework, did he?
No, he didn't. He didn't think at all, that the guy he was going to carjack, he probably thought, boy, I'm lucky. Here's a guy at 1:15 in the morning sitting in the car, not driving anywhere. I can go carjack him. Well, surprise, 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 right?
Surprise.
Yep, no doubt about it.
Well, back to the Russ trial. What did you learn from the opening statements this week?
Well,
that you've heard thus far.
Of course, the prosecutors come out and they basically are pointing out that Baldwin was a guy just playing make-believe of a real gun. I believe that's the way they started out with it. They continually talked about the fact that it was careless. They talked about, and not a lot of surprises here, kind of things we saw in the last trial. They talked about the fact that he would not pay attention to the safety meetings. They're saying that they're going to show where he was walking around pointing, using the weapon as kind of a pointer to point here and point there, that he was constantly going around pulling the gun, and shooting around. Basically, they said he failed to do the safety checks for the armors, and he ran around shooting the gun, And then they went ahead and brought out this, and I think this is where the really heart of their case is. They're saying that he ignored gun safety rules on a set. And then they referred to these rules as so-called cardinal rules. And you and I were talking about that at the beginning. You never
point it to anyone.
Yeah, never point a weapon at anyone. Always assume that every weapon you hold is loaded.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and so they're saying that he ignored that whatsoever. They also spent some quite a bit of time, I think, trying to debunk this fact that they messed up this weapon when they were testing it and tried that critical test that caused damage to the weapon. And the way they were debunking that was they were pointing out again and again that this weapon, when it was made, was perfectly functioning, that it had been tested before it had been sold to them, that there were several people who had handled the weapon. And so they went to a great deal of expense of time to say to the jury that this is a perfect operating weapon, and there's no way that weapon could discharge unless the trigger was pulled. Now, there was no doubt this was what you call a trigger that would fire easily. In other words, and I did this as a young officer back before we started carrying the 9mm weapons. We would actually carry these wheel guns, James. Now I'm telling my age, aren't I? But I used to carry a 357, which was a revolver. And we would actually have those triggers worked on a little bit so that there wasn't as much pressure to pull the trigger, so you could pull it pretty quickly and it would discharge. And so surely this weapon had that as well. So they went to a lot of time to spend that this weapon was really in fine shape. One of the things I think is going to be very incriminating is that Sosa, one of the directors, they're saying that he told Baldwin at the time of this incident that he encouraged him to slowly draw that weapon and to point it at an angle. And the prosecution is going to be showing then that Baldwin ignored that, and he insisted on quick drawing it rather than slowly pulling it out during the time. And he quick drawed it once, he did it twice. The third time he brought it out, the weapon discharged. So I think that's what they're saying. Now the defense, on the other hand, the defense opening statement, we learned some other things. The 911 call, they actually played it. And when the person talked to the dispatch, immediately they said, there has been an accidental shooting. And so the defense is saying that, this is a tragedy. We all agree it's a tragedy, but it was an accident. And then they went ahead to say that even in the 911 call, the person who was making the call put the blame on the assistant producer, the first assistant producer, who is actually responsible for the safety on the set. So I think what we're seeing here is that they're basically saying that, Alec Baldwin did not put that live round in that weapon. This would not have happened if there had not been a live round in that weapon. The armorer was responsible for making sure that the gun was safe. Then there was a second check that was supposed to be done by the first assistant director. He just took a real quick look at it. He didn't check it correctly. And they called out these words, and you're going to hear these words over and over in this trial: code gun. And code gun says that this weapon is safe. So I think that's what you're going to see that they're basically going to say.
Wow. Okay. So what do you think the jury will say? And how about our survey?
Well, first of all, let me say one other thing real quick.
Okay.
If you were to say who won today on the basis of the opening statement, that's what we've been talking about, I would have to say the defense won. I was very impressed with this guy. And I can tell you why you can know that he was getting through to the jury. Seldom do you ever hear of attorneys interrupting an opening statement. With the defense's opening statement, the attorneys interrupted him not once, not twice, but 3 times. And they called for sidebars to go to the judge. Now, that says to me, James, that this defense attorney, was resonating with the jury. They knew that, they saw that, they wanted to interrupt the flow. And they did that 3 times. And rarely ever do you see, attorneys interrupted in their opening statements.
Right.
So I think that this says that the defense knew, the prosecutor knew that this defense attorney was really, really communicating to this jury. So if you were to say between the 2 opening statements who won today, and that's why they tell the jurors, you don't talk about this case, like you and I are talking about it.
Right.
They can't talk about that case to one another, even when they're not in the jury. They say you do not talk about this case. You do not consider this case until what? Until all the evidence is in. So while I could say to you that I believe that if you look at the opening statements that the defense won in that contest, that certainly doesn't mean that they're going to win the trial, because it's not over until all the evidence is in. But hey, about that survey, I think today that the defense won. But last week I would have told you that I think the prosecution is going to win. So what does the audience say, James? Tell us about that survey.
Well, it's interesting because based upon what we shared last week, what we knew and what we had shared about Hannah and her conviction, the consensus from all the listeners that had listened to that podcast, 52% said he would get a guilty verdict.
52%. Wow.
52%. 22% said not guilty. Another 22% said, well, we're not really sure. They're undecided. And then 4% said there will be an appeal will be likely.
Oh, wow. Yeah. So the majority of our fans thinks that he's guilty right now.
As of right now. Now, based upon what you just shared about the defense opening statements, that may change the consensus. So we're going to go back and we're going to ask our audience again to come back and go ahead and put your poll back in. Again, we're going to clear it out and offer a new one based upon the opening statements of the trial this week. This is now week 1. We're going to ask for them to give us their feedback on this one.
Real quickly, before we leave, I got to make an apology, James. Last week, I said that the assistant producer pled guilty. He did not plead guilty. He pled no contest.
Yes.
And by no contest, that means that he's not admitting guilt, but he's willing to accept the conviction. And there's a real difference there. And I did not share that difference with our listeners last week. So I want to apologize. I misspoke. He did not plead not guilty. He pleaded no contest. The second mistake is I just turned on my camera, man. They couldn't see my pretty face.
No worries. It's all good.
So I apologize 2 ways, man. Can't see my pretty face, and at the same time, I misspoke on that first mistake I ever made in my life. Thought I made one a few years ago, but I was mistaken. So until this time next time, this is Charlie Crimebuster reminding you, stay safe, stay alert. Yep, for the life you save, it could be your very own.
You have been listening to Charlie Crimebuster. You can find additional podcasts at charliecrimebuster.com. You can also support our first responders, military, and law enforcement communities at peacemakernetwork.com. Or subscribe to our YouTube channel using tag @CharlieCrimebuster. Even visit our Facebook page, facebook.com/Charlie Crimebuster. Or if you would like to make suggestions for future podcasts, please send your ideas to charliecrimebuster@gmail.com. That's charliecrimebuster@gmail.com. Thank you for joining us today, and we hope that you will join us next week for another exciting crime story with Charlie Crimebuster.